Okay, so regardless of whether or not you were here yesterday, I mean, yesterday was a short class anyway, so whether the sub told you the directions like I told him to, or blah, 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 whatever other excuse you have, like that doesn't change the fact that I always leave the slides there for you. And in the slides was an informational video that you could have watched about how your constructive response final is set up. There's like a few minor differences from this year to last year, but everything that you see on this screen is correct. So tomorrow is your constructive response final. Hopefully that's not too big of a surprise to anyone if the date has been set since like March of when I plan to do the constructive response final. And really, if you look at your review, it's not some big packet. It's a single sheet of paper with all of the possible questions that you'll be asked. So everything that you were taught condensed down into just a few questions. And just like the normal practice constructive response tests, this one for your final exam looks just like your study guide. So if you can just know how to do these problems that are on your paper, then you should be good for the final. Now you'll notice on your paper it has these directions, but it says you may choose one question from each unit to complete, but the choice is yours. For the review, you need to do all of it for sure. Okay, like, no, I don't want you just doing one from each section. For the review, you do all of them. For your final exam, you're only required to do one from each section, and I really need you to hear me on this one because kids did it wrong last semester, and then but they could have passed the class. But because they didn't take advantage of the extra credit opportunity, they failed. So like, it's so important. I need you to look at me. This is so important. Although it says that you're only required to do one, you should do more. Because the other option that you do additionally will be extra credit. Each question itself is worth 10 points. So this part of the final will be worth 30 points. But you could get, like, if you do all of it and get it all right, both options on each unit, there were only 3 units, so it's actually really short. If you get it all right, do all the problems, you can get a 60 out of 30 for this section of your final, which is a 200% on this section of your final. This is the part of the final that if students do well on their final, it's this part. And really, prior to us having a constructive response final, students usually just fail their final for math. It's not like we don't prepare you for it, like we give you reviews that are aligned exactly like the tests. But I get it, you have lots of classes that you need to also pass. Students just tend to not do well on their multiple choice final that they take on like the very last day. So I never like bank on students doing well on that. I'm more of like a pessimist when it comes to that. I'd rather you go into it thinking, okay, this part of the final is going to bring my grade down when it gets to the very last day of school. It's not impossible to do well on it. I'm just saying, unless you actually study, then that's probably what it's going to be. This part of the final, the constructive response part that you are taking tomorrow, is what will save you in that case. Students that generally take advantage of all the extra credit opportunity, maybe even if they're not getting it all right, when we combine it with the multiple choice final, it ends up being a good grade usually. So like, I can't stress that enough. This will save you on the other part of the final that most students get. If you do all the problems, even if you don't get them all right, if you get some of them right, it will be a good grade, should you do it. So you have class time today to try it. In the last 30 minutes, I will answer any questions that you have. And it's pretty short. Like, I might even be able to answer all of them if you ask me about all of them. But I prefer that you see which ones are more difficult first that you might want to ask about. Know that even though like you can get extra credit, you still have to do at least one from each unit when you take your actual final. So you can't just do like all of unit 5, all of unit 6, and none of unit 7. You can't do that. Like that would be like a -10 deduction if you don't do any of the choices from a certain unit, okay? So keep that in mind. This part is my favorite part of the final. The students tend to actually do well on it. I'm not hiding it from you, what the questions will look like. You just have to now go back and remember how to do that. Later, after 6 hours today, just like I do for all of my practice constructed response tests, I will publish this key for it. So really no excuses, like you can look at it, you can memorize it, you can study it. Of course, it will be different numbers, but that's about it. So plan to do well on it, plan to study for it. We are taking it tomorrow. Any questions? Yes. Yes. I will also post all my recordings from all my classes today. I'll even post them from last year too, because it's the same exact review. So all you gotta do is learn how to do it. And then next week, you'll have some time to review for your multiple choice final. You'll do your multiple choice final. The highest grade you could get overall in that final exam category is 150%. Like if you do all the extra credit on here, and if you get 100% on your multiple choice final, when we average that, that would be 150%. Now, grades are up to date for the most part. Like there's still some curving that I don't put in until the very end because I want you to work your butt off and get the grade you want prior to that. But even then, like, it won't change by very much. Your unit test scores were updated. What else? I maybe have like a couple new things that were turned in that need to be graded. But for the most part, your grade for that, not the final exam part, is mostly set. So if you want to see like how well do I really need to do on my math finals, Google final grade calculator. There's tons out there. But say you're at a, let me check here. But say you're at like a 55%. And all you want to do is pass. So then you would put, my current grade is a 55. I want at least a 60%. My final is worth 10% of my grade. It's telling me that I only need 100, not I only need, but I need to score at least 105% on the final to get a 60% overall. Is that impossible? It's not impossible. It would be impossible if there was no extra credit opportunity, but I'm telling you there is. For this person, and of course this factors in the multiple choice part too, but that part is, you know, how I feel about that part. This means that this student would have to take advantage of the extra credit and score pretty good on it, which is not impossible. It's totally doable. Or you could come to Tutoring Tuesday and do some test corrections for half credit back to make this even less. My favorite thing in school was figuring out what I had to do to keep my A. So if this was me and I just want to keep my A, I would have to score at least a 63% on my final. Right? So you can play around with it, set a goal for yourself. But we are taking what I think would be the better portion tomorrow. Do well on that one, especially tomorrow. Any questions? Okay, so then get to work at like 10. I'll check in and help you on the board, but you can ask me as you go as well. Brooklyn? So constructed response final tomorrow, unless you plan on like emailing me later or watching the videos later and figuring it out through there or looking at the key. If you don't ask prior to you taking your test tomorrow, then you will just never know. You'll just have to give your best guess. So which ones do you need help on? First one on unit 6. Okay, so unit 6 and unit 7 were all about quadratic functions, different things about quadratic functions. Unit 6, we have the expression 16t² represents the distance in feet an object falls after t seconds. The object is dropped from a height of 502 feet. It says, what's the height in feet of the object 5 seconds after it's dropped? So, know the difference between the distance in feet that the object has traveled compared to the height of the object. It's not asking just how far did it travel, it wants to know what's its height, if its starting height was 500. So I could figure out how far it traveled in 5 seconds by plugging it into the expression for t, because t is for time in seconds. So 16 times 5 and then squared. Please, for the love, like I already know someone's gonna make this mistake. I'll show you what the mistake is. They'll try in their calculator to do 16 times 5 and then square it. I just know someone's gonna do that tomorrow. Just put the whole expression in your calculator, if it's all numbers like that. The answer is 400 versus what I know someone will do tomorrow. They'll do 16 times 5, and then they'll square that number, 80. It's not 6,400. Okay, it traveled 400. You have to do the exponent first before multiplying. So that's how much it traveled. Its height would be different. So I know that it traveled 400. If it started at a height of 502, then what do I need to do to figure out its current height? However, think it is a critical thing to do. If we know it traveled 400 feet and it started at 502 feet, if it's being dropped, is the height increasing or decreasing from its starting height? So then I have to decreasing the math. I have to subtract. I have to subtract 400 from the 502. That would give me its current height of current height. $102 is its height. It traveled 400, but we want to know its height, not just what it traveled. So that would answer that. For the next part where it says write an expression representing the height of the object in feet seconds after it's dropped, you could think about the math you did over here, but now it should work for no matter what the time frame is. So we're going to use t. What you could do is think of the math that you did, like we did 16t², and whatever that value was, we subtracted it from our starting height. That would work. That's the math we did. Or you could think back to when we did that unit, that 16t², we spent at least 3 lessons evaluating and got to a point where any sort of projectile motion problem follows this format, where it's negative 16t² plus the velocity times c plus the starting height. Okay, so if it's being affected by gravity, which it is, that's why we have the 16t² from before, then we should have this part. It said it was being dropped. It didn't say it was being thrown, so no velocity, so nothing for that term. But it did give me a starting height of 502. Let me make this look more like a negative 16. This is equivalent to this, it's just in a different order. So if you are someone that is good at memorizing things, I would memorize this to help me solve. if you are someone that's just good at problem solving, like thinking critically, if this is how much it traveled and this is what it started at, then we just go from that to both of these and the same thing. Questions on that? Okay, questions on others? Yeah. The second one for unit 6. Do me a favor, guys, phones, just put them in your backpack. I know some of you genuinely use them for your calculator and whatnot, but like about half of you that have them out right now, I'm just not teaching that. So just put them in your backpack. Thank you. So the second one on unit 6, you said, John? So here it is. Use the diagram to show that 5x plus 2 times x plus 3 is equivalent to this. The diagram it means is one of these. And since it's a 2-term times a 2-term, then it should be like a 2x2 diagram. If you choose to just maybe FOIL it, technically you're not following the directions, but you're also still proving that they're equivalent. So you wouldn't get full points, but you'd at least get most of the points if you don't use the diagram. But to get the full points, you'd use a diagram like this. The way that you set it up is like one expression will go on one side, split between the terms. The other expression goes on the other side. If it's negative, make sure you include the negative. Normally we don't include the positive sign because if it's not there, it's assumed to be positive anyway. And then within each box, it's like finding the area. What's 5x times x? Good. What's 2 times x? Just 2x for this one. For this box, what's 2 times 3? And then for this box, what's 5x times 3? So that's me showing with the diagram. And then you probably still have to combine like terms. So the x squared term doesn't have a like term. The 2x and the 15x are like terms because they're both x to the first power. So you can combine the coefficients. 15 plus 2 is, sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. 17x, yes. When you combine like terms, you don't change the variable, okay? Don't make that an x squared for some reason. And then plus x. So it should be something like this, and then they told you what it's equivalent to. You just have to prove it. So use a diagram to show that these are equivalent. This would be you doing that. The next part, it says, is x minus 3 in parentheses squared equivalent to 2x squared plus 6x plus 6? Explain or show your reasoning. So this one, you don't have to do a diagram, but you could, like you already have to do it for the other part anyway, so up to you. Remember that this is expanded to this. You cannot just distribute the exponent like and make it x squared minus 9 or something like that. You have to expand it first. Then if you want to do the diagram, it would look something like this. It would be x negative 3 and x negative 3. Put each expression on each side, make sure you include the negative if it's negative. And then here, what is x times x? For this one, which is negative 3 times x? For this box, what's negative 3 times negative 3? And for this one, negative 3 times x. Now, of course, you have to combine like terms, so let me identify that real quick. I have 2 like terms right there and there. What's negative 3x plus negative 3x? Good. The other terms are not like terms, so I'll still have them. They'll just be not combined with anything. This is what it's equal to. So to answer this question, I would say no, it is not equivalent. And since I showed all my work, it said explain or show your reasoning. Since I showed all my work, I could really just kind of stop there. Or I could say something else like, I don't know, maybe you don't know how to solve this by multiplying. You could talk about how they're not equivalent because they don't produce the same graph or something like that. Just give me another reason if you don't know how to multiply or forget. Questions on this? But no, it's not equivalent because really it's equivalent to this other expression, not the expression that they said. Other parts of this review. Same thing tomorrow, Brooklyn. First one for unit 7. Okay, so the solutions to this equation are 1/6 and 5/6. So remember, unit 7 was more about how to solve versus just what are the solutions. This is telling me the solutions. So graphing wouldn't be like that useful in unit 7, but it can check your answer sometimes. This one says show how to find those solutions by completing a square. So say that even though we're going over it right now, we still have like 24 hours to memorize it. Say that you completely forget how to complete the square, but you want to try for the extra credit, or of course you have to try one of these for the day. You could solve it with another method and show all your work, and I would give you some of the ones. Not all of them, because you still need to follow directions and complete the square, but that's just something else we can do. But if you do it by completing the square, then you will get 8 points. If you do it right. Now, completing the square, is this in the correct form for completing the square? If not, what form should it be in? So I promise you, like, been taught before, it's all been recorded too when I taught it to you. Lesson 12 was when we first introduced completing the square. Go back to my notes. Do this too, you don't have it. Find where we did lesson 12. And then memorizing steps by tonight. But like, I promise you, I would not put something on your final that I never taught you. Remember, we did this activity where we created perfect squares. Completing a square is like creating perfect squares. Here are the steps. Like word for word, you should follow these steps. Have them memorized by tomorrow. Rewrite it as x squared plus bx equals c. Completing the square is the only one that doesn't want it set equal to 0 in standard form. It wants it where the constant's on the other side. Then it says, take half of b, square it, add this to both sides. Factor the perfect square. Take the square root of both sides and solve for both cases. Like these steps are so specific. I usually condense them, but like to get the points on that problem, you would have to know these steps. So we're gonna apply that, and I'll write them on the other page too, but maybe it's not as long. This is in lesson 12 if you want to go and read them. Okay, but step 1 is to write it into this form. How can I make it more like this? How do I move the constant to the other side? Subtract 5/36 on both sides. You have to cancel it out on one side, like you can't just pick it up and move it. You have to cancel it out, so if I subtract it here, it becomes 0 there. On the right side, it's now negative. So that's step one. If you could even just do step one, I would give you some points. Maybe like 10 miles an hour. So that's step one. Step two is to take half of B. Anyone remember what we do after that? Take half of B. I know someone else can put a test on it too. Take half of B, then do what with it? Then square it, then add it to both sides. Now, what is my B value? My number in front of the X. Need to go ahead and tell me what's my number in front of the X. Not so fast, no one's answered. But is the number in front of the X? What is my B value? But is it if it's not written? Okay, and since there's a minus X, that makes the number in front of the X a. Okay. How in the world are we gonna take half of B squared, add it to both sides, if you know what C is? You just don't care enough to tell me. But we're gonna take half of B. B is -1, what's half of -1? Andre, what's half of -1? Okay, -0.5. And then we're gonna square it. So Roxanne with -0.5 squared. You know, you guys can use calculators, right? Like, I don't know how I have like my biggest class, but none of you would answer basic numbers. My smaller classes are still on top of it. I wish you were in those classes. Like, it's not cool to make it. So when you square something, should it ever be negative? So how do you avoid that? No? How do you avoid the calculator telling you it's negative? You put parentheses around it, just like I did right here. It should be a positive 0.25. All right, so we took half of B, we squared it, now we're gonna add it to both sides. 0.25 or 1/4, both are okay to use. Normally I stay away from the decimals because most of the time it's not a decimal that ends, but this one does end. So if that's easier for you to add to both sides, then that would be allowed because it does end. That makes the left side that makes the left side x squared minus x plus 0.25 equal to -5/36 plus 0.25. I'll add that in a later step when I have my calculator up. You can use your calculator to do that one and simplify it for you and everything. But I'll just leave it like that for now. So that's me taking half of B, squaring it, adding it to both sides. Step 3 was to factor the left side. The whole reason we even do this method at all is so that when we factor it, it makes a perfect square that I can write in a more condensed form, so that it's not x squared and x, which I can never combine. It makes it easier to solve. So this is what I'm factoring. What would go on the top of my diamond? Okay, good. 0.25 or 1/4 if you did it as a fraction. And then what would go on the bottom? So it's A times C on top, B on the bottom. What goes on the bottom, which is my -1. And remember, this is supposed to create a perfect square, so I should have the same number here and here. I know it might be hard to think of what multiplies to 0.25 and adds to -1, but we kind of already did it already. Whenever we are filling this in, it usually ends up being whatever half of B was. So -0.5 times -0.5 is multiplying to 0.25 and adding to -1. That's the whole reason we do it. So that we can create a perfect square and write it like this on the left side. So step 3 is to factor it. I still need to add this together. But I will say step 4 is to solve, like basically isolate x. And now that x is alone, it's so much easier to do that. I'm gonna use my calculator because I know I don't like working with fractions, so I know how to use a calculator to like do everything I need to do. First, I have to do the -5 over 36 plus 0.25. It gives me a decimal that goes on forever. I don't want that. So I'm gonna press this button and now it gives me the simplified fraction. So that's what's on my right side. We're gonna start isolating x now. So always start with what's farther from the x. What's farther, the 2 or the 0.5? Like physically farther. The 2. Right now it's an exponent. So what's opposite of squaring something? So that's what we're gonna do. Put everything on one side, the other side. On that left side, it just becomes x minus 0.5 because we canceled out the square. On the right side, I need to square root 1/9, but I can even use my calculator to do that. And if they give me a fraction, not a decimal, you don't want to round or leave, I get 1/3. And remember, anytime you square root, you have the plus or minus. So don't forget that part. That's how you get your 2 solutions. Questions so far? Opposite of subtracting 0.5 is, and that's what I do on both sides. And again, I can use my calculator to do the operations of fractions. All I have to know is how to solve. That's it. Like how to undo what's being done, how to do the opposite. So I have 1/3 positive plus 0.5. And this is the fraction it gives me, 5/6. That is one of the solutions they said it would be. The other one I get from doing, because remember it was plus or minus 1/3. The other one I get from doing -1/3 plus 0.5. And now my other answer that they said I would get, the 1/6, is how I get that. Right? Any questions on that? Even if you could just do some of those steps, that would get you some of the points. Might have time for one more, depending on how long it is. Are you guys all good on? Yes? Okay, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna make sure you guys all good on unit 5. You guys scored the best on that test out of all of them, but it's been a while. Unit 5 was exponential functions. Also, don't put your papers away, because I will walk around and see who wrote things down. Basically tells me who cares about their grade and who doesn't, who I should bump if they're close to the next grade, and who I should just let stay where they're at. But anyway, you said first one, right? A car that was originally sold for $18,000 loses 1/5 of its value each year after it was bought. After 4 years, how much is the car worth? So, and then it says write an equation for the value of the car It should be already 600, but I didn't fix it on mine. T years after it was released. So let's start with the equation first. And because of time, I will not make you answer me as much as I would normally. But unit 5 was our exponential functions. The basic formula for those was y equals a parentheses 1 plus or minus r to the t power. It was this one or this other one, but since we're dealing with a fraction, which might as well be a decimal, I'm gonna use this. Because we don't multiply by what it's losing, we multiply by what it's keeping. A stands for what? Not leaving until we get this done. So A stands for what? Starting value. What is my starting value? 18,000. Is it increasing or decreasing over time? So it's going to be 1 minus the rate that it's decreasing by. It's losing 1/5, so it's going to be 1 minus 1/5 to the t power. This one, like for number 2, doesn't specify, it just wants an equation. When I simplify it, and I could probably use function notation, but it's fine. 1 minus 1/5 is 4/5. This would be my equation. Or 0.8, that's a decimal that ends, you could put in parentheses 0.8. So then to solve this one up here, it would be 18,000 times 4/5 to the 4th power, because that's the time frame that we're looking at. Whatever decimal that gives me, since we're talking about how much something is worth, we're gonna have 2 decimal spots. I don't think I have enough time to put in the calculator because I need to come out and get the papers real quick, but that's how you go.